Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Recovery Live. This event is brought to you by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration's Bringing Recovery Supports to Scale Technical Assistance Center strategy, otherwise known as Brass Tacks. Our TA Center is dedicated to increasing access to recovery supports, and we achieve this work through a variety of mechanisms, including a lot of TA focused on systems transformation and developing the capacity of peer-run recovery community and family and youth-led organizations. Today, we're going to be discussing justice-involved individuals and reentry and recovery the first 30 days. We are extremely fortunate to have three amazing presenters with us. Kathy Wright, who's from the New Jersey Parents Caucus and is a parent of a justice-involved youth with mental health challenges, is going to be focusing on justice-involved youth. Tamara Oman, who is the Human Services Program Coordinator for the Wisconsin Resource Center, a mental health prison, will be focusing on women's issues upon release. And Kurt Robinson, a justice-involved individual from 1984 to 1987, is also with us. He's currently the NAACP president of the Spokane, Washington chapter and supports justice-involved individuals, the Revive Center in Spokane. Kurt will be addressing men's recovery issues upon release from jail or prison. And I want to give a quick update about Kurt before we begin. He's currently on duty as a wildland firefighter, and he's near the front line of some wildfires that are currently burning in the mountains of Oregon. As such, Kurt is only able to join us by phone today. There is a picture of him in the Adobe Connect room. And I have to say, the Brass Tacks team is just incredibly grateful to have all three presenters with us today. And we look forward to the discussion and question and answer period. Now, as all of you were arriving today, we posted a poll question for you all to answer. And I'm looking at that now in the actual Adobe Connect room. And what I'm trying to just get a sense of is how many folks are here. So we've got about 25% of the folks are people in recovery. We have about 8% of folks currently who are have either are justice involved or formerly justice involved. We've got another, I don't know, 9, almost 10% of folks who are family members of justice involved folks. And we've got a smattering of recovery coaches, peer support specialists. We've actually got about 20% of the folks on the call are peer support. Got just a small number of housing specialists, and I'm really glad to see those folks here. We've got 35, almost 36% of folks on the line as case managers. That's fantastic as well. And we've got about 30% of the folks, too, program supervisors or directors. Another 30% are government staff and employees. That's a fantastic cross-section. I'm grateful for all of the diversity that's joined this event today. And I want to I'm going to go back to my discussion with all of you. I've got a little bit of housekeeping to do. And the style of today's event is going to include a lot of participation from all of you. Excuse me. You're going to see a couple of more polls come up momentarily, and we really hope that you'll participate, because this really helps us better understand who's listening. And we also hope that you're going to share your questions and comments at any time during this event. And you can do that by just typing your questions into the comments and questions here, and we will take it from there. It may take us a bit of time to get to each question, but we're going to do our best. And now I'm going to ask for my team to put forward the second poll. And I'll give everybody just a minute to respond to this. It's pretty straightforward. And it looks like we've got a large number of folks working with justice-involved individuals and people who are in recovery. And I'll just give that a little bit more time, let people get a moment to respond. And I'm going to jump into the housekeeping. Today's session is being recorded. It's going to last approximately an hour. And if, as you are listening to this content, you feel your organization may need some technical assistance around this or any other topic, please feel free to download the Brass Tacks TA form from the Files for Download pod. And there are several several documents in there. There's the PowerPoint. There is the TA request form. There are a couple of great articles around justice-involved youth. and justice-involved individuals in general. We encourage you to, download those and make use of them. During this event, all of the participants are in listen-only mode, and we, again, encourage you to submit questions at any point in the question and answer pod located on the right side of your screen. If you experience technical difficulties, just ask us in the comments box, and one of the team members will address that really quickly with you. Please listen in using your computer rather than using a phone line. If you experience audio difficulties, there's a phone number available in the audio instructions pod located in the upper right. And when we close this room, a satisfaction survey is going to automatically open in your internet browser. We really appreciate you taking it's only a couple of minutes, it's real quick. Your answers really help us to serve you better. A link to the survey is in the web link as well, and you will also see links to our website and to the SAMHSA's webpage on brass tacks. That concludes our housekeeping items, and we have a final poll for you to complete. We're pulling that up right now. And we would love if you could just take a few minutes and respond to this poll question and type in some responses as you see fit. And while I'm going to leave that poll question up for everybody, and with that poll question kind of hanging out there for folks, I'm going to turn this over to Kathy Wright to start the presentation and get us moving. Kathy, please take it away.
Well, Steve, thank you so much, and thanks so much to all the people who were able to come out and to, for lack of a better phrase, come out to see us and have a chat with us about reentry and recovery. Particularly, I'm going to talk about for youth who've been involved in the juvenile and the criminal justice system. Steve is going to start my slides in a minute, and I'm going to walk you through that presentation. One of the things that I would encourage you to do, and to mimic what Steve says, is to make sure that you ask questions and answers at the end of this, because as much as we would like to believe that we're going to remember to include everything, we won't. So make sure that you take advantage of that. I wanted to talk a little bit about what some of the essential recovery services are, and predominantly I wanted to make sure everyone on this call understood that there is a process when it comes to reentry. And the process is really not that it starts when our kids are released from prison or a lockdown facility. It starts when they go in. And I think it's very critical for us, particularly as parents, that we understand who is involved in prison social services, right? We reach out to those people and we let them know who our kids are so they have a good idea of what the types of services that they're going to need to help with their rehabilitation. The other piece of that's very important is that rehabilitation includes a youth peer-driven piece. It is critical when we talk about rehabilitation that we talk about the inclusion of people who've been most impacted by this, right? I think that as much as we'd like to believe as professionals or folks from academia that we have all the answers to all those questions, we don't. Clearly we don't as we take a look at our recidivism rates, which we're going to talk about later. As part of that, we need to make sure that we have wraparound services. In addition to that, there needs to be a level of care management, right? There needs to be team building so that, because it's a very vulnerable time when kids come out of incarceration. While there is for us, a celebration, it's a vulnerability for them because keep in mind they've been confined for a certain period of time. The other piece to that is how we engage their families, right? How we include them in the process. We need to make sure that we take a look at that and that they are included in an appropriate manner. The other big thing for many of the youth, we have a youth caucus, New Jersey Youth Caucus, and one of the biggest things that they talk about is housing. We've seen it where some of our kids have been released and they have nowhere to go, or where they could go, they don't necessarily want to go. We've had some kids who requested not to go back to their communities because of the impact or the gang involvement, et cetera, et cetera. You can go to the next slide, Steve. The other thing is mental health treatment and substance use treatment. Those are critical as well. And it's not just treatment, right? It's not just the treatment that they've been getting and going to the place that works with kids who are living in this particular part of the state, but it's treatment that is specific to them. So, for example, like substance use treatment, we have seen and walked through that whole reentry process, and where many of the kids are able to continue to get high and still be in parole because they are not held to a certain level or standard for whatever reason, and that is not helpful, right? Particularly when we talk about recovery. They need health care because for many of them, particularly those kids who've been injured while incarcerated or spent time in solitary confinement, what we see is a lot of health issues, physical issues. And so we need to be very clear on what their health care needs might be. We need to make sure that they have insurance. And they need to be taken to these facilities to make sure these rich linkages, right, that they're connected with them. They need to have an employment. You know, they need to feel that they're making a difference in their lives, their families' lives, and their children's lives if they're parents. You can go to the next slide, Steve. Thanks. The other piece about that is education. So whether or not they've started their education while being incarcerated, like in New Jersey, we have what's called the New Jersey STEP program, which includes a consortium of colleges, and kids can actually accrue college credits while they're incarcerated. And this is true even if they're incarcerated in the adult prison system. Some of our Youth Caucus members have been able to complete college credits while incarcerated. The issue becomes once they're released, we need to make sure that there's a continuation of that, right? So what we've seen is sometimes that process lapses, right? And then kids are left in the midst of that. They may have motor vehicle needs. They may need to get their driver's license, or they may have past fines. They may have other legal issues, you know, which are pending, which may be on a municipal level, right? So some of those legal issues they may not even be aware of. And then the other issue is with family relationships and parenting. We need to make sure that, you know, we have to look at these kids as, you know, they're part of this larger group of family and community, and we have to treat them as such. And then the last thing would be their linkages to community resources. So we need to be very much aware of what resources exist in what communities, which resources are more appropriate, et cetera, et cetera. You can go to the same slide, Steve, or the next slide, sorry. Our recidivism rate in the criminal justice system here in the state of New Jersey is at about 67.8%. One of the things that's interesting about that, and it always comes up with me, especially when I'm having conversations with Steve and some of the other brass tack folks, is that I don't see the level of evaluation that I think that we should see. We should be able to not only identify these programs that are afforded to children who are in recovery, but also we need to be able to look at the evaluations of that, right? So what are the outcomes? Are we providing a service, and we're providing the service because more kids come to this service, or if 2 years down the road they're still not incarcerated? So we need to be a little more outcome focused. We need to recognize that probation and parole, in and of itself, they're deficit-driven services, right? And so in the midst of that, we need to make sure we're aware of the paradigm shift that goes along with that, and the mistrust of the professional community that many of these children and families have. So I encourage you to think about some of the things that I've gone through. I know I've gone through fast, and I look forward to your questions and answers. The other thing I will let you know is that the lack of cultural and linguistic competency in our community is something that impacts recovery and reentry in our state continually. The lack of information for parents and family members and community members and local stakeholders. And so one of the things that we've done is we've included a guide for people to be able to download, to take a look at that. And it walks you through recovery and, and mental health challenges in children and, the process of waiver and juvenile justice services, et cetera. So I think that pretty much wraps it up. I'm hoping, because I was told that I had to stay within my 8 minute. And so I'm hoping I did.
You did just fantastic, Kathy. Thank you so much for that. And we'll certainly come back and chat a little bit about, in the question and answer period. I'm relatively certain there'll be some folks who have some questions for you. Tamara, before we jump in, I just want to report out really quickly. There were a couple of interesting comments in the poll that we had. If the question was, if you're in recovery and were just involved, which supports have you received right after release that were more important to sustaining your recovery? One of the responses was a person was released in '89 and was left to their own devices, which didn't work out for a while. I'm one of those individuals as well. I certainly understand that. We've got somebody else said, thought I had known many that struggle with reentry and finding the supports that are needed and end up returning to environments that are less better off than when they left. And this was something that Kathy was pointing out too earlier in her conversation about justice-involved youth. Here's another comment. Very few were available. I had to find everything myself. That's a really common, statement from a lot of us who are justice-involved. So there's some really interesting answers in here, and I want to thank everybody for doing, taking a moment to bring that to all of our attention. And I can certainly tell you we'll be using these as we, think about how do we support justice-involved individuals, particularly within the context of brass tacks and the technical assistance we provide. So with that, Tamara, I'm going to turn it over to you. Take it away.
All right. Well, welcome, everybody. I want to say thank you, first and foremost, for taking time out of your life to come and check this out. I think it's important because we're in this together. I think that, you're probably going to hear things that you've already know. I strongly suggest what my hope is that you will really, as we're talking about this, take a moment to think about the people you're on this call for, whoever you serve, whatever you're doing, because it gets so easy to look at numbers and data. I really think it's really important to think about this as a journey. This reentry and recovery is a journey. So thank you again for that. I think the biggest thing, and this is not rocket science, is the first thing we need is a plan, right? We need some hope. We need to believe that it's possible so everybody who's in our lives can help do that. We need safety and opportunity. So I want to talk a little bit about women in particular, what they're facing. Some things are common, but the way that society perceives things regarding women is completely different. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we need to consider, what these ladies might be able to consider, what we can help them consider in order to increase their likeliness for success, and where to begin this process and how to prioritize it. I think that's one of the hardest things. I've been out for 14 years, and I think prioritizing what I thought was a priority wasn't the biggest priority. I thought housing and job was. It was safety and security, safe environment. So we're going to talk about that. We need to talk, in order to talk about reentry, we also have to talk about what was prior to incarceration, and they're similar to what they'll be facing when they get out. Because, and probably more intense than they were to begin with because of all that time you were away from those things. So some of the key factors that are certainly, if women don't address the trauma issues, mental health issues, substance abuse issues, if they're not at all addressed while they're incarcerated, they could be worse. Those types of situations are re-traumatized when we're in these types of settings. So when you really think about it, it's not intentional. It's not a system that says I want to hurt people, but it's a system that has to operate in certain ways. It doesn't consider that as often. We're starting to, and I think we're in a good time frame that we're moving into understanding the trauma a lot more. And I think trauma and the way that women deal with trauma is completely different than men for the most part. Most of the women in our criminal justice system have physical, sexual, emotional, social violence, domestic violence. They've often been the individuals, you'll see this as we get down here, nearly 44% of the women didn't even complete their HSCD that are in prison. Mental health and substance abuse disorders, as I said, they probably get worse, trying to deal with providers. And the biggest thing, I think one of the largest things that we don't talk about, and I don't even know if we recognize it, are the relationships that women have and who they typically spend time with. We know the number one predictor, Wisconsin does a great job of looking at what are the predictors of returning for recidivism. The number one predictor is antisocial associates. So often, we don't even think about how powerful relationships are. It's not mental health, it's not substance abuse, it's who we spend our time with. But either they encourage us to get better or they encourage us to stay in that same place. Women's identity and self-worth. Yes.
Tamara, this is Stephen. Folks are having a little bit of a challenge hearing you. If you could get the phone a little closer to you, I think it'll be a little clearer. Thank you.
Can you hear me now? We good? Okay. So one of the biggest things that I think differentiates between women and men, not always, but is their identity is based in their relationships. The impact of dysfunctional or unhealthy relationships in women's lives have to be evaluated to identify and seek healthy relationships. I don't even know if some of us even knew what a healthy relationship was or is. I think we're still working on that. 60% of incarcerated women were not full-time employed before they were arrested. So the reason that's so important is normally the women are the primary caregivers of the children when they come into the institution and when they go home. People anticipate whoever might have taken care of their kids if they haven't been taken or removed from their lives. They often come back into the community and people will say, hey, here's your kid, I've had your child for six years, it's your turn. Without people really realizing or us having the opportunity to practice being the individuals we are and then parenting and not understanding its type, you can't just, hand that to someone and go, here, now do it, if we haven't gained the skills. I think women are more likely to really struggle with the amount of shame, regret, embarrassment, and stigma that society has attached specifically to women, specifically to mothers, about the expectations of women. If you think about it, when I work with both men and women in prison, and people do not talk about the fact that fathers are absent as much as they do about the idea that somebody would choose drugs over parenting. That's not the case, right? That's not, women would never, all of the women that I work with would say the greatest difficulty they face is the shame and inability to be the parent that they want to be and the mother. And I think society says, what's wrong with you, even more so. For men, they expect them to pay child support, but they expect women to never do this kind of thing. And so it really makes it harder for women to be able to, come out and say, I need help, how do you help me, and I want to be the mother I was created to be. And then 9 out of 10 mothers report that their children often live with a grandparent or relative. That idea is that when people come back, these people that have been taking care of them, also the struggle is about, I want a parent, but you're telling me how to do it and trying to figure out, like, who am I in this role, right? I'm trying to become mom again, and I'm going to probably have to debate with the families that have taken care of my children just to try to do that and learn how to do that well. Those are the big things. So if I was going to say we need to prioritize what we're doing, I really think that the first and foremost, the most important thing that we need because of our trauma of experience, because of our poor relationships, we need safe, sober, peer-supported housing with mentors and roommates that have the same idea. So, and I also need to live in a housing environment that isn't still ran as if I'm incarcerated. If that's the case, it's very difficult for me to learn how to make decisions on my own, how to practice, how to navigate the system without fear of retribution. And I'm not making a judgment call on how that goes, but that's, often some of the halfway houses are ran still by Department of Corrections, and I'm trying to learn how to separate my role in that kind of environment. The other biggest thing, and I think it's probably equally the same, is that family, friends, children, intimate partnerships, my relationships I talked about, that often women leave. They end up incarcerated based on, they come in with an addiction possibly, domestic violence, and when they go into prison, if that's not treated, if they don't have an opportunity to look at some of these things, when they get back out, they often return to the same environment that they once lived in, which was already unhealthy and unsafe. Because I think, one, that leads to another part of this section which is the lack of education, lack of really living wage jobs for women and skill development for women. We don't do that. We do not spend time. We're trying to get there, but in prison, there's few opportunities to gain the type of skills to have a living wage job when I get home so I can provide for myself and my children when that happens. And you know, we have personal goals. We have ideas about our health and wellness. I really believe that we need a safe space to be with other people who have been where we've been. That's why peer support is so monumentally important in this role. While we're learning, while we're beginning to find out who we are in the safety of knowing we're not alone and we can do this and you will walk with us. So we've got a lot of questions. This is hardly any time to do this, to really get out there the conversation, but I can't thank you enough for even taking this on. When I got out 14 years ago, there weren't these conversations happening. And I'm going to get choked up. We're in this together. We've got to do this for each other. Thank you.
Tamara, that was beautiful, and thank you for your passion. Just spectacular. And I'm going to turn this over to Curtis. It's our final presenter. Curtis, take it away, my friend.
Okay, how can you hear me?
Nice and clear, my friend.
All right, great. So give me a second here while I just get a couple of things adjusted. I want to make sure I don't run over my time, so I'm also setting a watch. And some of the stuff you folks are going to hear is some of the radio chatter in the background. I do have to keep my ear cued to what's kind of happening here on the line. So please excuse some of that background chatter if it starts interfering. First off, I want to go ahead and thank SAMHSA, Steve, and all of the other administrative and supportive staff, the other panelists, and all of my peers and system professionals for turning in and giving this, like Tamara was just talking about, this much-needed discussion such serious attention. Really appreciate that. It means a lot to those of us who have overcome so much and have fought so hard to get as far as we have, to have you folks really giving this intersectional dynamic between recovery and peer support, recovery and reentry, the attention that anybody that's involved in it knows that is long overdue. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and kind of open up some of my thoughts on the subject, at least especially for men within the first 30 days, is the ease to access of reasonable, affordable living situations, and so many of my and this is men and women, but I'm focusing specifically on men with this. We face the ordeal of either returning to the old haunts, previous groups, or dysfunctional family situations, and either one, many of them, or sometimes all of them, were contributing factors that led to or fed the did you fix that? Okay, sorry about that. We're getting kind of squirreled out here. All right, can you hear me?
We can, Curtis.
Okay, good. Anyway, it led to many of these dynamics led to, can you turn that down? Led to the decision-making process that fed the initial Justice Evolve event. It is this lack of immediate, clear, ease of access and transition to clean and sober, physically sound, and emotionally healthy living environments that is a major, and I mean major contributor to re-triggering the decision-making processes that were behind the Justice Evolved event in the first place. Because these original issues is much more convoluted than just the Justice Evolved event. It is, hold on a second, I got to check my notes here. Stuff is kind of coming at me. So the solution must be more extensive as well, because the original issue is so convoluted. The solution must be much more extensive. Recidivism and relapse rates are so high that a deeper look must be taken into the problem and the solution. If housing itself and just housing itself were enough, then this would have been solved a long time ago. It's going to take some of those things that I just went off. It's going to take healthy, sustainable, structurally sound housing, a living situation, emotionally healthy, to really start having the results that we know that we all need. Because those of us that have made it out of it know that eventually that's what we found. But the process was so extensive and so convoluted that it was almost ridiculous, and that's why you've seen so many people fail in this process. To truly help increase the successes of our returning citizens, the reality of a multi-level wraparound approaches to living environments is crucial. The reality of the need for this must include pre-release preparations in which a person is actively engaged in a realistic, achievable, and immediate actionable upon release plan for their BNA, their CS, their PS, and their EH living environments, at least 6 months prior to release. Then post-release contacts and accountability and need adjustments must occur, as many of us know in these situations, things change, and sometimes they change very rapidly, and a lot of them are out of our control. And if this happens, then there needs to be some fall through, some secondary options that can be immediately initiated. All of these will hinge on not only the soft handoff from a pre-release to post-release services, but will also hang greatly on wraparound and follow-up through continuing soft interaction and accountability led by peer and professional services that, again, help the returning citizen learn to navigate through their unique circumstances. And that's going to actually bring me into something I'm going to touch on here real quick, and that's the traumatized population. Of my experiences in the justice involvement since 1984, I have personally and observationally seen multiple manifestations of restrictive barriers that are systemically and interpersonally happening. Myself and many of my fellow men have had a ridiculous time in coming to terms with the internal systems of thought and perception that not only led to our justice-involved event behavior, but also our addictions. In far too many ways, these are not only overlapping, but are intimately linked, with the linchpin being a trauma-based lifestyle platform. Now, it is important to understand that the origins of these trauma impacts are in many ways system-related. The immediate solutions, though, are not. The most important, impactful, and immediate solutions can only come from one's ability to move from a blaming place, and blame in most cases rightly deserved, to a personal responsibility and ability to process, heal, and overcome these circumstances. A fact of the matter is, we have been dealing with a system that has either directly or generationally traumatized us, and it is my opinion that as a person is released, he on some level starts having to confront this reality, if not only through the exposure of the possibilities of things having possibly been otherwise. You know, as if I had done this, or if I made a different choice, or if I'd been raised this way, that automatically starts creating the confrontation of the fact that they are a traumatized individual, and we are obligated to help them start navigating through this process. It is this dilemma that time and time again, through lack of pre-processing and pre-release preparation, which sets up a person in reentry with substance abuse use issues on the path for, in far too many cases, rapid relapse. And since this conflict is inevitable and occurs in most cases shortly after release, the system dynamics can be tailored in a way that escorts and assists the individual in coming to terms with the reality that their unique trauma dynamics, pre- and post-release, in a healthy, empowering, and healing fashion. The reality of this conflict is inevitable, as is the real potential for successful navigation through the process, and I'm going to call time.
Curtis, thank you. That was fantastic, and you were right on time. So listen, folks, I know that there's a lot to talk about here, and 1 hour is not going to address everything, but the three presenters that you have here can give you three really important and unique perspectives on, what is justice involvement and recovery, and particularly, the issues within the first 30 days. So what I want to do is jump into some questions right now. Basically what I'm going to do is just pose these to the presenters, and we'll get them to chime in here. So the first question I have, doesn't being in prison itself cause a trauma event? And I'm just wondering if any of the three of you can chime in on that.
I'm more than willing to. I'm ready to say, okay, so the thing, first and foremost, so the people that work in prison, I'm just going to give you the data for that, so it might help you understand about the data of people who live there. Those people go home. The data for people who work in prison, they have the highest rates of alcoholism, addiction, domestic violence, divorce, and suicide, 38% higher than the average type of employment. So if those people can go home and have other wellness and safety plans and recovery plans, the people who don't go home, can you imagine the percentage of individuals that experience vicarious trauma by just you see people harming themselves. There's all kinds of things that happen to do that. There's also a lot of the policies that we've had in place, which weren't intentional originally, but like securing people. For individuals like myself who have a history of sexual assault, when you strap me down or put restraints on me, I'm not in that room with you anymore. I'm back to that place where I was sexually assaulted. I'm not able to respond to you in the way that I would like to. The thinking brain goes offline, the fight, flight, or freeze takes over, and then I respond to try to save myself, which isn't to hurt anybody, but it's to try to be safe. And so the trauma response is very, it's triggered all over the place in an institution, and not even intentionally. I think we're coming along in that way.
Tamara, thank you. Kathy or Curtis, any comments, additional?
I would also say, those are great comments, Tamara, but I would also say, like, particularly when we're talking about youth, right? Anytime there is an out-of-home placement, right, whether it's in incarceration or child welfare, right, foster care, there is a level of trauma that goes with that. And then as there is exposure while they're incarcerated, absolutely there is a level of trauma. But similar to what Tamara said, we're not, I don't think as a society, our systems, particularly our prison system, we're not at the point that we need to be at to treat that.
Yeah, and I'd like to chime in on that.
Absolutely, Curtis, go ahead.
Yeah, and the reality of this is, and this is part of the discussion that it's just got to start happening. And I love the fact that this is happening here because the answer is absolutely, emphatically, without a doubt, yes. People in prison are traumatized. Now, here's some of the stuff that people don't want to talk about, and many of the things that men have a problem coming to terms with because we're raised to be tough and, to bear up and buck up and all that, happy stuff. But the reality is that, we're vulnerable human beings. We're just, we kind of operate in a different way than women, but trauma is trauma. And so when you have a justice-involved person that is doing the things that they're doing that create the justice-involved event, they're not making it because they're in their right mind. There's obviously some underlying factors that are way at play here, and so let's just call it what it is. They're traumatized, and especially when you're dealing with impacted populations. We are systemically traumatized, and then we're generationally traumatized, and then we get sucked up into this mass incarceration system, which then traumatizes us for being traumatized instead of looking at us more deeply and asking why are we doing this instead of punishing us for doing this. And so, and that's really and I'm just going to say it like it is, when you're looking at a system that's trying to create a cheap labor force, that's the best way you can do it, is keep them so spun up and then punish them for being spun up. That way, when they get out, they're not going to really know what to do, and they're going to be, pretty much, you stick a ring in their nose and you just lead them around that circle, I mean, it's a very, unfortunately, it's a very unhealthy dynamic that's happening here in America, and it's about time we started having a real discussion about why it's happening and what are we going to do about it. And part of that discussion is coming to terms with the fact that we are traumatized and that we're the ones that need to do something about it as the impacted populations. And number two, the system needs to stop coming at us from the angle of trying to traumatize us in the first place and then punishing us for being that way.
Well said, Curtis. Thank you. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
Here's another question, folks, and I think this really dovetails very closely with all three of your previous comments around this. Could drug decriminalization, especially in the case of nonviolent drug offenders, be a possible method for reducing the ripple effects of trauma for those incarcerated and their family members?
I had a hard time hearing that first part of the question.
Yeah, can you repeat that?
Could you repeat that? Yeah.
I'm happy to repeat it, folks. Could drug decriminalization, especially in the case of nonviolent drug offenders, be a possible method for reducing the ripple effects of trauma for those incarcerated and their family members?
Okay, can I go to that again too? Here's my
Sure.
thing about that. First and foremost, addiction is probably related to traumas in a person's life prior to them becoming addicted, right? So here's the thing. If we never treat the underlying issue of addiction, of mental health, of things that have exacerbated people's behavior, the things that if we never treat that, if we never go there, if we continue to blame people instead of look at the whole story, we are not going to get there. Even if they were to get, if we don't treat the treatment, say the decriminalization of drugs, I definitely agree with that. I certainly think that we should be on our way with marijuana and other things because the reality is there's so many benefits to those and we don't really want to look at it. But if we never treat the trauma, we will always be in some situation that absolutely takes us to places and makes us and has us respond in a way to cope so that we can continue to live. And a lot of times our coping mechanisms have been not healthy. So absolutely, you wouldn't be re-traumatized because you would be getting well because you were treating the trauma.
Mm-hmm. And so I think, Tamara, the question becomes, right, so the powers that be, right, the folks that are involved in working in the institutions and running these prison systems, the question would be, why not? So why not treat the trauma? But I think when we think about things that further exacerbate trauma, so let's talk about solitary confinement and the impact of that, right? Look at that on whether it's the adult population or the youth population. So I think if they start to think about trauma, they're going to have to think about some of the resources that they use to maintain a certain level of coherence in the facility. And I think that's when you get to the point where it becomes very difficult. I could be wrong.
So this is Curtis chiming in here. And on the drug issue, am I talking over somebody?
Nope, you're good.
Okay. All right. I think we're just at that point where, our American society has to grow up and catch up with kind of the rest of the planet on this issue. Some of this stuff is very dangerous and absolutely needs to be monitored. But the reality is that the reason so many people are self-medicating is because of their trauma. And because of the social economic systems that they've had to live under that have created the traumatizing dynamics that instituted the events in the first place, which now, because of a lack of processing, have called for self-medication. So it's kind of just doing laps around the mountain and really to kind of get off the crazy cycle, we've just got to start coming to terms with the fact that we can no longer do things the way that we've been doing them and expect different results. Definition of insanity, right? We've just got to start moving forward and evolving in our thinking and our processing here as far as American society and how we actually deal with each other, and especially how we start dealing with the reentry recovery population. And that is absolutely going to call for a very serious look at the business, and it's a business of narcotics and drugs.
Fabulous, guys. Thank you for those responses. I've been following along and listening to the conversation and checking the chat, and there's a couple of things the chat has been phenomenal for folks. I'm really glad to see everybody using it, and there's a lot of conversations occurring. But one of the things I want to point out, and this is, in a way it addresses, another question that I have in front of me, and that is, does SAMHSA have a list of resources for people going through reentry? And so one of the conversations in the chat box is around a trauma approach called seeking safety. And, that's one of them. There are a number of prisons that are using that now. I know Hawaii has a trauma-informed dorm, and it's my understanding that at least at the time they were using seeking safety. And the other thing, the other resources out there, Brass Tacks, certainly has some resources and technical assistance available around reentry. The SAMHSA Game Center is really, sort of a one-stop shop for justice involvement, justice-involved individuals, system-level transformation, if you just Google Gains Center, G-A-I-N-S, you'll find their website. There's a ton of great information, and the wonderful thing about that is that Brass Tacks works very closely with the Gains Center, we do a lot of collaboration around that. So I just wanted to throw that out to everybody. It's a set of resources that are instantly available, and through that you can find a number of other resources as well. So let me go back to the questions really quickly. There's one here that I was looking at, and I want to make a quick comment on the front end of that, and it's really around, the relationship. And here's the question. I am a PRSS in Texas, and we pick up folks when they get out of prison. We take them for lunch, and we bring them into our community center and show them around before we take them to their living environment. We've had some good results with this. The reason I want to point that out is because as a justice-involved individual, I went to prison in the 90s. When I was released, there was no one. And that's a scary moment for a lot of us. I'm not alone in that. I think, Curtis and Tamara both would agree. I don't, want to speak for them. But it is around the relationship and certainly the modeling of our recovery as formerly justice-involved individuals who are now leading a satisfying and productive life in our community. I just wonder really quickly if Curtis, Tamara, or Kathy have, any comments around that particular statement.
I can kind of go ahead, Tamara.
Go ahead, Curtis.
Okay, I'll just make it quick. So, here's a couple of things that I saw as problems. So one was the lack of safe and sober, supportive, and sustainable housing. Number two was the lack of honest conversation pre-release and post-incarceration regarding trauma. And number three was the true, intimate, and overlapping intersecting relationship between justice involvement and trauma and self-medicating. Honest conversations about that. But the solutions being sustainable, healthy, sober, and structurally sound and affordable housing, and having peer-supported, peer-ran, situationally appropriate services, and that's that relationship piece. I mean, because that's absolutely the key. Those of us that have overcome this know what it takes. And it is without a doubt the thing that pulled me out of the deepest, darkest parts of my life was the fact that somebody was willing to get over themselves and join me in it and show me a way out of it.
Yes. And I agree. The thing, so I want to combine the two. Yes, I think it's amazing that we have other states that are picking people up. I really think we should be meeting people 6 months before they get out as peer specialists, going into the institution, meeting with them, building a relationship, helping them decide what plans they want to make, while partnering with the powers that be, because we need to do that. They're going to be on supervision most likely. How do we build healthy, honest relationships with those people without retaliation, right, without some fear of what's going to happen? And we do that by showing them that this is really who we are. We partner with them. We help teach them about these things that are happening and how we did it. And not just we did it, There are hundreds of thousands of us out here that have been an untapped resource to help develop programs that actually work. We have a trauma program in our institution, and it is amazing. It has changed the lives of people. It's 180 days. They all live on the same unit. But the thing is, and it's exactly what Curtis was saying. Meet me at the door so that I have hope when I walk out with my little box of things, my little tiny box of things, $0, and all of this fear that I'm never going to make it, that society's going to hate me, all of those things. If you give me that opportunity and a hand up, not a hand out, I don't want a freebie. I want to feel like what I do matters. I want to be able to get out here and use everything that were the worst things in my life to help love others be better. That's everybody. So we need people to help us become those people. That's who we are inside. It's how do we get there and someone walk with us while we become everything we were created to be, because we all are. We're all amazing people. And it's not just people in prison, it's everybody. We just got to help.
Yeah, hey, Steve, if I could kind of chime in on one more piece on that. And so here's one thing I want to speak to you, because it wasn't just my peers that helped me, because my peers were definitely the ones that helped me, but it was also people that were willing to readjust some aspect of their identity to understand and be willing to look at me through, compassion and accountability with, restorative consequence dynamics that didn't necessarily walk the walk that I walked, but they were able to grasp the concept of it at the deeper emotional levels that really helped them, to have that connectedness. So there definitely is, without a doubt, the peer-to-peer stuff that's got to happen and has to continue to grow. But I also want to speak to the system professionals and just let you know that if you are willing to really challenge yourself and address some of your own internal biases, some of your own implicit stuff, and really get compassionate with those of us in reentry and recovery, then that connection can also be can happen. That connectedness can happen, and that can also foster the relationship or the escorting out of that dark place and into some healthy living and thought patterns.
And can I say one more thing on that? I know we're probably trying not to we want to keep as many comments as possible, but I want to say this. The thing about peer support is it's not usually 9 to 5. We started an organization because there wasn't anything like that called Voices Beyond Bars when we got out, because nobody was there, right? All of our professional help that we may partner with and do okay with and well with, they close the office at 5 o'clock. My problems are after 5 when I'm a drug addict. They're like that crazy time when I'm by myself. I feel so hopeless and alone. I got bills coming in. I got nothing coming out. Here, this is when and where I need to know that I can walk through those dark moments. And peer support has always been the thing that showed up when other things weren't able to.
Kathy, any responses before we move on?
Oh my goodness, I'm sitting here because I'm in awe. Like I cannot say it any better than that. And that's really what it comes down to, and it's an amazing thing. And I hope that people that are on this webinar, so to speak, really understand that peer piece, really understand the process of that walk, really understand that it is very much, which I believe Tamara alluded to, the way in which people view the world. It's how you see me. It's how you see us, because even though I am the parent, I mean, clearly I have done the time. I haven't done it real, but like one of the things that I have said is that, I've done the time with my child, right? When he was struggling with an addiction, I was out there in the streets. I was running through the shooting gallery. So while it wasn't me, but I have a good understanding of that. And it is so important. I mean, if we really want to change this and we want to move into a space where people can heal, right, and we could celebrate that, we have to start to value the thing in which, that's in front of us. And I think so it requires, you know, particularly professionals, it requires us to sort of loose the foundation, you know, loose the academics, you know, because I went to school, I got my master's degree, and I can honestly tell you in all the work I've ever did, I don't think that any of that was as helpful for me as it was being the parent of a child that was diagnosed with multiple mental health disabilities and substance use disorder, and then eventually ended up in the juvenile justice system. It didn't help me the way in which that lived experience did, and helped me to help other families. It is so important, I think, that as professionals we see that. One of the things I always will ask professionals in the training we do is I will say to them, you know, a kid comes in, he walks into your office. What's the first thing that you see? He's African American. What's the first thing that you see? And I'll never forget, one woman stood up and she was excited, I think, and a little embarrassed, and she said, I see color. These are the things we have to do. We have to be true to ourselves, like Curtis said, right? We have to be true to ourselves. We have to look at our own biases, right? And we have to make a space, right? This whole paradigm shift. There has to be a space for youth and families and individuals. There has to be a space, you know, and for professionals. It's not that we, you know, as professionals we have all the answers, because we don't. If we did, we wouldn't struggle with the recidivism rates. We wouldn't have the drug issues that we have. You know, we would, you know, many of us wouldn't have a job. So I think we need to think about that and just think about, you know, think about how we view people who are involved in this, who are incarcerated, who are, you know, have addiction issues, who have mental health challenges. What do we think about them, you know? So I would encourage us to do that, really do some soul searching.
Kathy, thank you. And folks, we're nearing the end of this session, and I know, you know, we could continue this conversation all day. What I'd like to ask everybody, just briefly, in 30 seconds, I'll start with Tamara, move to Kathy, and then to Curtis. 30 seconds. Top 2 or 3 solutions for the conversations we've had. What are your recommendations? Tamara.
To partner with people instead of trying to tell them what to do and directing them. Listen to their hopes and dreams and their plans, and help them find the solutions and relationships and systems that will help encourage them to become those things that they're looking for in their goals. Be non-judgmental as best as possible. We have to partner with people. People would do what they could if they could. I mean, that's just a no-brainer. So really, I challenge each and every person in here to take a look at themselves and say, is there anything that stands in the way of me going out and being somewhere to assist somebody, whether it's the returning offender, the guy on the corner. We need this more now than ever. We need each other, and it starts with us, each one of us, deciding this isn't somebody else's problem. This is all of our issue, and we are in this together.
Beautifully stated, Tamara. Kathy, 30 seconds. Solutions.
I would synthesize. Here's what I would say. We need to engage, involve, partner, and ultimately collaborate. I think that's the end result, right? Collaborate. Walk with us. You know what I'm saying? Like walk with us. Like really understand. I know a lot of times we say, oh yeah, we can understand. I don't think, and that's why sometimes I struggle to even answer some of these questions, because I am a parent, but I am not my son, right? So I don't know what it is to get out of an institution and walk around with my hands behind my back for the first month, right? So let's talk about what the impact of that whole experience has had on him and our children. But I would say that, like, collaborate, like, hear them, like set aside what you know to be true for a moment, right? So it requires us to do some stuff which might not feel too good. It might feel uneasy for us. But ultimately, if we can get to that place, you know, if we can get to that place, You know, that is clearly a celebration, right? It's a collaborative celebration.
Perfect, Kathy. And Curtis, we are closing in on the end of this session. 30 seconds, my friend. Solutions.
Well, you know, I think I hit on some of them already, you know, that some of the stuff, I mean, we need sustainable, healthy, sober, structurally decent, sound, affordable housing. Things need to be peer-supported, peer-ran. They need to be situationally appropriate services. Things need to be viewed through the justice-involved events, and the people involved in recovery and reentry need to be viewed through compassionate accountability and need to be handled with restorative consequences. To my peers, what I want to say is be willing to get more involved. Not only, I mean, if you're listening, you probably are involved, but we need more, and we need more of us involved because, frankly, we're a nation within a nation right now as far as the justice involved. We are, if we put our hands together, we could wrap this planet 3 freaking times. If we were a nation, as big as the United States was in the early 1900s. I mean, it's just ridiculous. You know, welcome to the results of mass incarceration. To my system professionals, what I want to say is, you know, and it's already been said, but you know, the ability for you to radically impact this issue and the people that you encounter is going to be intimately tied with your own ability and desire and willingness to address your own internal stuff, i.e. your implicit biases. To be willing to have a foundational shift that will allow you to have a more impactful and meaningful relationship so that we can start having the honest discussion from a wraparound perspective about the trauma that's really happening, not only with women, but also with the men, so that we can come to terms with this and get to where we need to go.
Well said, Curtis. And with that, folks, we are really glad everybody could come today. We are completely out of time. I apologize for keeping people over. When this webinar or when this Recovery Live event ends, there will be a satisfaction survey that pops up. We hope you'll take a moment to take that. Thank you all. Thank you to the presenters. It was fantastic. And we look forward to more of this in the coming year. Take care, everybody.